Our next guest is the president of the American Suppressor Association, Knox Williams, and he joins us live. What's going on, man?
Not a whole lot, dude. How about you?
I'm doing good, doing good. Good day here in Dallas. No complaints on my end. So let's first and foremost, let's talk to some of the people wondering, why do suppressors need their own association?
So we're about a 6-year-old association, and back when we formed, there was nobody really out there advocating on behalf of our community, right? Like at the time, a lot has changed since, but at the time, I worked at a suppressor manufacturer, and we weren't even allowed to exhibit at the NRA annual meeting, right?
Wow.
Like there was this idea that it was a little bit too extreme, a little bit too far out there, and we wanted to change that notion. And we realized that if we didn't do it ourselves, nobody was going to do it for us. Fast forward 6 years, a lot of things have changed, but the way I kind of look at it, it's like, remember in 2005, everybody had their own perception on, black guns and MSRs or whatever you want to call them.
Yeah.
That's changed as well. It's kind of a similar story.
Okay. So now for just, we're going to kind of go like novice level here a little bit for people who don't know too much. A lot of people, I'm always completely blown away by the number of people who think that suppressors are utterly and completely illegal. So are suppressors illegal?
No, hard no. They have always been legal on the federal level. They were regulated in 1934 under the National Firearms Act. Now, there are 42 states in which civilians can own suppressors. So there are actually 8 states where they are illegal. Of those 40 states, you can hunt with them in 40 of them. But the notion that you have to get some special crazy license or whatever, no, you're paying a tax stamp, much like you pay a duck stamp, if you want to go hunt waterfowl. It's the same kind of principle. It's just got a little bit different process than if you're purchasing a regular rifle or shotgun or something like that.
So what do you think it is that drives this notion that suppressors are illegal from a cultural standpoint?
They've just kind of always had this James Bond stigma to them, right? Like you look at Hollywood and it's always some criminal or some spy that's using them, and they're really never up to any good. They think that it's something that's just, can be about this big, the size of a pillbox. It's going to silence the gun completely, and it's just absolutely empirically false.
Yeah. What's interesting about that to me is, everybody has this, not everybody, but there are people who have this inherent fear of the silence of a firearm, like the ability to have a firearm that's silenced. Like it just kind of creates this internal fear. And it's like knives don't make noise either. But there aren't, there isn't necessarily this phobia about quiet knives,
Yep.
but from that standpoint though, let's talk through the process of what it actually involves. Like you kind of went into it a little bit, but in terms of getting a suppressor, typically, you got to pay the tax stamp. What was the genesis behind that tax stamp historically?
So back in the 30s, President Roosevelt wanted to ban firearms. Mm-hmm. He was trying to find ways that he could do it, and he realized and recognized that the president and Congress don't have statutory authority to do so. So they did the next best thing, and he and his attorney general at the time created this idea for what became the National Firearms Act. Interestingly enough, they included machine guns and suppressors and explosives and things like that. Well, in the original draft, they had handguns included too. The NRA at the time stood up and said, that's a hard line in the sand. We're not going to allow handguns to be included in this. But as a result, and really through poor legislative drafting, they never removed the provisions for short barrel rifles and short barrel shotguns. So that's why those two have kind of stuck in. But they levied a $200 tax, which at the time, you buy a suppressor for $2 to $3, right? Like your average wage was less than that. If you adjust it for inflation, it's $3,500.
Jesus.
So nobody could afford it.
Yeah, that is freaking nuts to me, man. Because I cry about the tax stamp now, now, it hasn't been adjusted for inflation, thank God. Don't want to give anybody any ideas either. But right, and and I'm crying about it. And back then, like you said, suppressors was like $2. Why are they so? I'm largely asking a lot of questions that I already know the answer to, but just to give you the ability to kind of speak on them yourself. Why are suppressors so important to gun owners? So for a lot of people, they see them as a specialty item that's not really necessary for firearm use.
Yeah, a lot of people, they're just misunderstood, dude. Yeah. And it's one of those things where anybody that I've ever seen, so like I only shoot suppressed unless I'm in a state where it's illegal to, and I have to not shoot
Yeah.
the suppressor.
Yeah.
Right? Kind of feel a little spoiled in that regard. But like every time I go out to the range, people come up and they're like, "Hey, like what is that? Like, can you get that?"
Yeah.
You know, and it's like, yeah, and you walk them through and you let them shoot without a suppressor, let them shoot with it, and the light bulb clicks. And it's like, this makes so much sense. It's so much more pleasant. It's so much quieter. As a result, it's a safer noise level. It reduces the recoil. It makes it a lot more fun to shoot, more enjoyable. And like at the end of the day, you know, that's really why people like to shoot for the most part, you know, and
Yeah.
there's really no negatives to it. It's all misconceptions.
Gotcha.
So I think it's kind of breaking through it.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think I'm starting to go the way of you in terms of getting spoiled by shooting with suppressors when I go shoot, because it can be incredibly fatiguing dealing with the concussive force of shooting a rifle without a suppressor, and you know, and in a lot of ways, do you wonder sometimes if with suppressors, it would kind of take away one of the talking points from the other side in terms of making guns seem more accessible? Because I know if I were to go out and take a bunch of first-time shooters out to the range, and I went out there with nothing but suppressed guns, that intimidation factor, I think, kind of evaporates rather quickly when you're not dealing with this massive concussive force of the gun going off.
Yeah, absolutely, dude. Yeah. I mean, you're 100% right. And like, I'll give you an example. Like 2 weeks ago, I took my girlfriend out to the shooting range, and you know, she's not a gun girl. Like, this is not what she grew up doing. So I finally got her out there, and I had her shoot. You know, we started out with 22. I had her shoot without a suppressor first for a few rounds, just so she understood like what was going on. Then we put the suppressor on. She's like, I don't want to shoot without it.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I hand her another gun without it, and was like, I want you to try this one unsuppressed, just again so you know. And she's like, no, like put the suppressor on it, and then I'll shoot it. You know, and she's a little 5'2", 100-pound blonde. Like, it just that it makes sense, and like you're exactly right, and that it makes it more enjoyable. And when you look at like shooter retention and retention amongst our sport, like that's incredibly important.
Absolutely. So now let's talk about HIPAA, as I call it, or HPA, the Hearing Protection Act, right? So like, what's the latest with that? Because I get a ton of questions from people about, you know, what's going on with the Hearing Protection Act? Are we going to have? Is it going to pass? What's going to happen? Where are we in stage in terms of the Hearing Protection Act?
All right, so I'll tell you this. I just spent 4 days in D.C. I got home a couple hours ago. That's why I'm in my apartment right now instead of at the office. But we spent 4 days in D.C. We've been pushing it and educating more and more members. Right now, we've got 141 members of the House signed on as co-sponsors. We've got 15 senators signed on. So, I mean, we're building it up. And we're pushing it, specifically targeting members of the Senate Finance Committee and the 2 House committees, Ways and Means and Judiciary. I think we've got like all but 3 or 4 members of the Judiciary Committee on the Republican side locked in as co-sponsors, and I think we've got about 10 to 15 members of Ways and Means signed on out of a 40-member committee. So like we're building those numbers up pretty high. The $1 million question is, when is this going to happen? Yeah, and nobody knows, right? Like, we're working on finding other bills that we can amend our language into. You know, that could be a great opportunity to get it done and get it done quicker. Yeah. We're going to also continue to dual track it as a standalone bill, just so we don't miss any opportunities. And you know, if the bill that we amended into, which hopefully we think we found one that we might be able to here shortly. But if that one fails, we've still got a standalone bill to push, right? Like, so we're trying to find any and every angle to get this thing across the finish line. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter which vehicle gets it through, just that it gets
through. So from your perspective, what does the shooting world look like if we get the Hearing Protection Act passed? What does life after the Hearing Protection Act look like?
Pleasant. Quiet, like awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, absolutely, man. It's yeah, I mean, and what do we foresee in terms of like the prices of suppressors? I mean, I'm pretty sure they're not going to go back down to $2-3 like they used to. But I mean, do you see it more or less? Would you see it evolving the gun culture or revolutionizing it? Because I think go ahead.
No, after you, man.
Yeah, no, I was just saying. I was like, I always wonder whether or not, just the kind of the unbridled access to suppressors now, without with the restrictions of the rigmarole of the bureaucracy, red tape, and all that stuff, the tax and paperwork. I wonder what that does in terms of igniting the culture or moving it forward. Whether it's going to be like a minor evolution or just this kind of radical change in the gun industry in the way that we look at weapons.
I think it's going to be the most revolutionary change that our industry has ever seen, right? Like, and I don't say that lightly. I think that when you look at hunting and the shooting sports, hell, even over in the military, especially over in the military, like tinnitus and noise-induced hearing loss are almost a given, especially amongst our service members and our hunters, right? Like 70 to 80% of hunters never wear hearing protection. Not like sometimes, but literally 0% of the time wear hearing protection. Because of that, for every 5 years that you hunt, you increase your likelihood for permanent hearing damage by 7%, right? Take that over the course of a lifetime, and it's no surprise that like almost everybody ends up in hearing aids.
Yeah.
Like I want to create a world where my future kids, I don't have kids right now, but like any kids that I have don't have to grow up and just say, well, I like hunting and I like shooting. I'll be fine if I wear hearing aids. Like, no, that is ridiculous. And it's a silly notion. And something that I think, this isn't 100% fix on that, but it's probably like an 85 or 90% fix, right? Like that's pretty solid.
Right.
I think when you look at like pricing, it's going to take a few years for supply to catch up to demand. What happens with that, right? Price goes up.
Yeah.
And
absolutely right.
That's just basic economics. It'll happen for a while. I think 3 to 5 years down the road after, hopefully HPA gets signed into law, market would equalize. The tax would obviously go away. So there's $200 off the top, but it's pretty likely that there would be an excise tax. The same excise tax on firearms would now then apply to suppressors. So, it's just kind of, it's going to be a seesaw. And I think ultimately the prices will drop. But in the immediate, 3 to 5 year range, prices are going to be pretty high, and you're going to be hard pressed to find a can.
Okay. Now, really quickly before we close out the segment, in your opinion, your personal opinion, you think we'll hear something possibly on the Hearing Protection Act? Are we looking at years? Are we looking at months? And I know you're completely guessing.
Yeah. I mean, like, look, we're pushing it as hard as we can. We're working with NRA, Congressional Sportsmen's Foundation, some other groups out there. We're all working it as a team. I think that, we're certainly not looking in the next month or two to get this to the president's desk. Our goal is to get it done before, in the 115th Congress. So before, next year, before the end of 2018.
Gotcha.
But if we can get it done sooner, we're going to absolutely do that.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much, Knox. Thank you for joining me and talking to me about the Hearing Protection Act and getting that information out there for a lot of people who I know have had tons of questions, and hopefully we answered those questions. But I really appreciate it, and thank you for joining me.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Absolutely, man. When we come back, Bill Wood is going to join us from LA with the latest anti-gun project out of Hollywood after this short break.